on your computer, and then your personal data as well, and also corporate data as well. So we're going to talk about ways of doing that, what some of the tools that you can use. Some of these tools are like available tools to you for free to protect your data, but it's also some of it has to do with understanding the different ways that data can be lost and stolen and things like that. So hopefully by talking about this, you will have an overview of how to protect your data and your personal information online. Also, you're going to give you some tools to stay on secure. If you look at my website, professorzayed.net, I also have some ideas. There is a section there about protecting your data and some of the tools available to you. I haven't updated the site in a while, but there are very useful tools that you can check. So when we talk about data protection, we mention the what is a digital defense, right? So you are using ways and strategies which allows you to make sure that the digital security protection of confidential electronic information. So how you do that? You take actions, you take few steps. Like for example, if you just giving you a basic example here, if you have your own computer, you can set up the firewall, or you have a corporate network, you can work with a firewall, and it's basically a way of protecting. It's like a way to prevent certain things from happening, like if you don't want certain applications to be used on your network and things like that. And also other ways like using your scanning your computer for malware and viruses and so on. If you, for example, technology is improving and advancing, and now if you used to rely on third-party programs, antivirus programs or anti-malware programs, that you have to maybe either get a trial or a version of it, or get a free version or get paid version. But now with companies like Microsoft, for example, they come in with their own operating systems. They have built-in anti-malware or antivirus programs and things like that, right? So we're going to talk about things like social engineering tactics. And what is social engineering? We're going to describe that. And I think I mentioned that briefly in my last lecture, but again, it doesn't hurt to kind of remind you again of what is really a social engineering. And it's one of the most common way that people, hackers, and they try to use these social engineering tactics to kind of trap people and get people to provide information to them and things like that. So big data made groundbreaking insight available in real time, right? So data protection is the process of safeguarding information. You safeguard information from what? From loss or theft, right? Because you could lose your data. It could be accidental. It doesn't mean that someone intentionally made you lose the data. You could be just accidentally lose that data, or actually someone's still trying to steal your data. So data privacy can be defined as the power to control what others know about you and what they know, what they can do with the information that they have about you, right? So this is what data privacy is. So there is a concept here called data backup is needed regardless of where the data is stored. So again, as I mentioned, and I think I talked about this before in my last lecture or two, where I said, doesn't matter where your data is, you need a backup copy of that data, because if you have it locally on your computer or on a program and that program crashes or your computer crash, you need a second copy of that data. And but you also, if you have it on a cloud, so the data could be stored in two different places. Could be stored on a cloud, which is on somebody else's servers and somebody else's equipment, or it could be stored locally on your machine, for example, your hard drive or your flash drive and things like that. So so some argue that data protection causes limitation to innovation and technological advancements, because you have to do certain things to protect that data, right? So you might limit certain things, implement certain technology that will do some kind of restriction and so on. And public data is not necessarily confidential data. Public data could be just data about, like I said, if you remember, I gave the example, if you're if you're a homeowner, you know, there are sites that you can go to government websites and you can find out who the homeowners are in your neighborhood. That's a public data. That's not confidential data. That's data can be seen by anyone. It doesn't have to be private. It's not private, basically. That's the opposite of private data. When you talk about private data, you talk about data that is not supposed to be seen or viewed by unauthorized people. Like, for example, do you want people to see your social security number, your credit score, and things like that? So unless, of course, you authorize them, like if you fill out an application, you apply for a credit card and so on. That's you know, you give the limited amount of private information about you in order for you to be approved for whatever you're applying for. So we talk about computer security, and that protects your network and your information and your computer and so on. Data loss prevention plan reduces risks. There are various threats from malware, and when I say malware, I'm talking about something called malicious software, and this is malicious software. The malicious, the first half of the word malicious is taken. There is a mal and then where, and then the second half of software is where. So malicious software, that's what malware stands for. So any program that is intended to do harm, that's called malware. So when you hear the word malware, you know, it could be something that could maybe delete your data. It could be something that slows down your system and so on and so forth. And then phishing with PH, not FISH, it's phishing. And this is how you pronounce it, phishing. And it's basically trying to get information out of you that I'm not supposed to have, right? Phishing for information, sending an email and things like that. So having you click on a link to provide me certain information. So some of the risks include cybercrimes, such as hacking, identity theft. So like if a hacker basically takes over your private information, they can actually steal your identity. They can, you know, apply for credit cards in your name. They can do so many things with that information. They have also spam messages, which is basically messages that you do not want to receive in your email. Usually spam are emails that comes to your email account. So I actually been noticing lately that I have been praising Google a lot for their anti-spam technology, where they have this option. If you ever click on an email, there's an option on the left side on that email. If you click on it, there is an option that look like an exclamation point inside of a circle or something like that. That's spam. So you can report that email as a spam. Now lately I've been getting a lot of spam emails in my inbox. Usually the spam messages, they end up getting in, and before they usually, most of the time, they get into my spam folder in my email, right? So sometimes when people tell you, I've sent you an email and you don't see it in your inbox, usually you go to the spam folder to look for that email to see if it's there. And if it's there, you can just click on it to make it safe, or you can drag it into the inbox and that you let Google know that this is not a spam message. And if you also click on an email that is being a spam, you are telling Google AI system or artificial intelligence that these emails are spam. So what Google does is they prevent those emails from going to other people's inboxes, right? So that's how usually the Google anti-spam technology works. But lately I've been seeing a lot of spam messages in my inbox, not sure why, and I've been reporting them as a spam. It's been happening in the last week so much to me, and I don't know what is going on, but it's becoming annoying now for me to see those messages coming in, right? So talk about antivirus software. They offer some protection. When I say the word some, and pay attention to the word some here, some protection, because a lot of people have this idea that false idea that if you have an antivirus, you are 100% protected. Can anybody think of a reason why this is not the case? If you want to share that, you can. But basically what's happening is not all viruses are known to the antivirus software, right? So a new virus might come in, the antivirus software doesn't even know about it yet. They call that zero-day attack, right? So new viruses come in, antivirus is not aware of that virus. It's not aware it's a virus, and they might let that slip in. So you have to, once the antivirus company knows about it, they update their database and they update their program to catch it for other people. But that's why it's not 100% foolproof. And sometimes people have this false sense of safety or security by using an antivirus, because they think if they are using an antivirus, they are safe and nothing can go wrong, and they can do whatever they want. They can click on links, they can click on attachments, they can download programs without even paying attention to what they're downloading, and they think because they have antivirus is going to take care of everything, and that's not the case. So I always tell people, there's a lot more to do it than just having an antivirus. So so that now talk about physical security. So talking about that is the physical device is locked up. So again, you could have a strong password on your device, your corporate device, your personal device, but it doesn't mean that that the data is safe, because if somebody steals that device, the physical device, they could just find ways to get into it once they have possession of that device. So you have to make sure that you're not only protecting the data within that physical device by having a strong password, by running antivirus programs, by things like that, but you also need to physically protect those devices. iPhones and laptops, people lose laptops in public places all the time, right? And they have corporate data and sensitive data on those devices. And we talk about digital security. Is the electronic information protected? So how do you protect that? There's different ways of protecting the data. You can encrypt it, you have strong passwords, you can back it up, and so on. Backing up the data doesn't prevent someone from getting access to it. It just prevents you from losing the data if somebody steals that laptop, for example, or somebody encrypts the data on your device. If you have a data backed up on the cloud, then at least you have a second copy of that data, right? So, and then we'll talk about privacy policies. What happens when the information is viewed? There's a site called Have I Been Pawned that I always tell people to check. And Have I Been Pawned is basically a site that you can actually go to and enter your email address that associated with some of your accounts. And basically what happens is, if it will tell you if there's any of the accounts associated with this email address have been pawned, which basically means compromised. So just to show you here, I don't know if you can see that browser on my share screen. So I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna type an email. Actually, I'm gonna type it here on a separate screen. Type my school email address, and then I'm gonna click pawned and see if it tells me anything, right? And here you can see I'm going to take a screenshot of that just to show you. So when I do that, it's telling me that no pawnage found, which basically means, because the reason it's telling me that, because the email address I tried I don't hardly have any account associated with it. So it's a school account. I can use it for personal stuff, but so this is something you can go and check for yourself. And now talking about malware, and again, I said malware is malicious software, and installs itself on a computer. There's different ways of getting it. Sometimes you could also get it by clicking on links and things like that, visiting a random site, suspicious site. Some of the results, I should say some of the results, not results, because there's a lot more to it than that. It could include pop-ups, viruses, or even tracking. Tracking is like a spyware, which is a program that actually records your actions, what you do, what you type, and things like what sites you visit, and so on and so forth. So malware includes viruses, Trojans, macro viruses, and logic bombs, rootkits, spyware, and adware. There's a lot more to it, ransomware, but we're not going to go through each one of these. It's just for just to give you an idea. And now some of the terms related to digital defense talk about firewall, bring your own device, or BYOD, and this is a term that is used to talk about what this is a policy related to using your own devices for corporate work. Like, for example, if you want to use your own personal device, mobile device to do check emails and things like that, you're using a personal device to conduct business on it. So there has to be policy applied to it. And then cybersecurity, cyber criminals, and information security, right? And a firewall is a piece of a software or hardware. So it could be both. It could be a software installed on your machine, or it could be a hardware device. And it sits between your computer or your network and the internet, and acts as a gatekeeper for all incoming and outgoing traffic. So, for example, one thing could do with the firewall is that if you did not request to visit a specific site, the request will, any traffic coming from that website is not coming through to your computer or your server or your network because you did not make that request. So this is one of the things that it's like, if you ever, like, I'll give you a good example. If you like live in a building where there is a security guard at the building, right? You order, like, if someone comes in and they have food and they want to come into the apartment, your apartment, if your name is not on the list to be allowed to come into the building, then the security guard will not allow you in because you did not, because there was no request for you to come in, right? So this is basically a good example of that. So again, talk about hardware and then the software. Hardware is built into your routers, for example. Like if you have a router at home, and then you have the software is installed on a computer, and device is often part of the operating system. So if you have your Windows machine, for example, has a firewall built in. So both of these hardware firewalls and hardware and software firewalls and application firewalls have user settings which can be changed to create the best compromise between security and convenience. So more stringent settings provide greater security, right? But they also might interfere with some applications like online gaming, email, and so on. Again, I talked about BYOD. It stands for bring your own device, and is a program that allows users to use personal mobile devices to conduct business. So a lot of organizations have BYOD policies in place where, you know, if you're going to use a company, if you're going to use a personal device to do business, then you need to follow certain policies and procedures that might even force you to install an application on your device so they can monitor the traffic or monitor the data on your device. So for example, if you leave the organization, they can wipe that data from your device if you have any company related data, or if you lose your device, they can wipe it remotely and things like that. So that's what a BYOD is. So the increasing use of mobile devices and BYOD policies, they affect the business's bottom line. A large number of companies allow employees to use personal mobile devices for business, and the majority of companies have a BYOD policies in place. I remember the days when they used to disallow or not allow employees to use their own devices for doing business, for conducting business, but there's some benefits and some risks involved. The benefits, of course, they don't have to buy every employee a device to use. They don't have to buy them a phone or whatever, right? So they can use their own devices. And so, it also provides you flexibility as an employee, where you know your own device better, you can use it, and things like that become more convenient for you. So now the term cybersecurity is protecting computers and their information from internal and external threats. When I say internal, I'm talking about, like, you know, threats coming from within the organization, right? Sometimes it might be malicious user or somebody that is actually coming into the organization to do harm, or someone who's not educated or is not being trained to do the right thing to protect the data. So cyber criminal is someone who conducts crimes online. That's what cyber criminal is. And then information security deals with the protection of data from any form of threat. Cybersecurity strikes against cyber crimes, cyber frauds, and law enforcement. There's a term called LAN, or local area network. and is a group of computers and networks, network devices, which connected together. That's what they call as within the same organization. They call those LAN or local area networks, and they're usually within the same building or office or floor. And talk about security policies, a statement of required protection of information objects. Security policies are written by IT or written by IT and or security departments, and define the rules and regulations regarding the employee behavior. And that's in order to maintain the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information. So we talked about that CIA triad, or confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So confidentiality is basically keeping the data confidential. And then integrity is making sure the data is not being changed. And then availability, making sure the data is being available for use. So that's what these are three terms in information security. Information technology security manager is someone who is, or a manager who implements the security program for the organization. And then information security is the protection of information and information systems from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction in order to provide integrity, confidentiality, and availability. So remember these three terms, CIA or AIC. Sometimes I call them AIC because when people hear the word CIA, they think of a government organization. But we're talking about, if I say AIC, it's availability, integrity, and confidentiality. And virtual private network, or VPN, is an end-to-end session which provides complete privacy and data integrity for enterprise users who access the enterprise network from the outside the internet. So what happens is you can be at home and you can actually, you don't have to go to the office anymore. If you have VPN set up, you can create this kind of protection or some kind of privacy or encryption between you and the internet. So when you reach out the servers or you reach out the network at your company office, then you are as if you are inside the office. And then wide area network is basically means that WAN, or it's opposite of LAN. LAN is local area network, and then WAN might be just the internet. Basically, that's what WAN is all those local area networks connected together to create this WAN, or wide area network. So talk about the secure PC, some of the or secure data. This just applies to securing your data. So you have here a firewall. We talked about that. Hacker attempting to gain access to your PC. And then you have if there's a virus, you have up-to-date real-time malware protection or antivirus program. And then you can also have a phishing protection as well. Junk, I'll give you the example of Google with junk email filter. And then you have a password protection here on your computer. If you want to log in, you need like a authorized user. So if you have an account, if you have a password to log in, you should be able to, if you're not authorized, then you're not going to be able to log into your system. And again, the word hacking is in computer networking, hacking is in any technical efforts to manipulate the normal behavior of network connections and connected systems. A hacker is any person who engages in hacking, right? Talked about that. Some of the threats that people face, ransomware. So ransomware is basically means hackers will trick you, like they use social engineering attempts. You will end up to trick you into, let's say, click on an application or click on a link or download a program, and then you end up infecting your system. So all your data becomes encrypted. So what happens is the hackers will send you a message telling you that we encrypted your data, and the only way to decrypt it and let you see that data is by paying ransom. That's why they call it ransomware. And to me, the way I advise people is the best thing, of course, after being careful and not downloading suspicious programs and things like that, is also backing up your data. Because if you ended up getting infected, then you have no choice but to pay. But if you have a backup copy of your data somewhere else, then you can at least refuse to pay if you don't want to, and then you can just wipe your system and then restore the backup from the cloud, for example, right? And then some of the other threats here, like the Internet of Things, the IoT, there are threats. For example, a lot of the IoT devices that we see today, the video cam and the ring, the doorbells and all that stuff, some of those devices do not get updated regularly. So there is a threat coming from that. So, and then cyber espionage, this, between nation states, cyber theft increases, and insecure passwords. Some of the attacks here, there's a lot more to it than this, but just to give you a brief, some of the attacks that people see all the time is one is phishing attacks, and then social engineering and dictionary attacks. Dictionary attack is a cryptanalysis and computer security. A dictionary attack is a form of brute force attack. So basically defeating a cipher. So trying to figure out what the password is, right? So run through against thousands or millions of passwords. So by trying hundreds or sometimes millions of likely possibilities, so they try words in dictionary. That's why it's not a good idea to try to have passwords like, the name of your cat or things like that. So you have to have a strong password. So playing it safe, free offers really aren't free when you get a free offer. So be careful with that. If you have to sign up, let's say, you have to give up your email address, or you have to do things like that. You have to visit a site to get a free offer. It's not really free. You have to give something in return. So it could be like your email address, your data. So is it worth it? You have to look into that. Is it something that you really want? Risks for clicking on links in advertisements. I remember that free offer really free offers aren't free. When I was in college years ago, I used to see that the credit card companies that come into campus, and they try to give you like a T-shirt or something to apply for a credit card or things like that. So you end up getting a credit card with a high interest rate. So this is what I'm talking about. Free offers aren't really free. And then risk of clicking email attachments. This is also, gotta be careful with that. So this is an example here of a physical security protecting a laptop. We talked about physical security. You can do things like use a lock. You can also use a fingerprint reader to log in and activate password protection. And company mobile computing policies also follow that policy as well. And then when it comes to using public Wi-Fi, public computers aren't protected. Avoid accessing financial accounts or making purchases. So if I was also advised that if you go places like Starbucks or to get into the Wi-Fi there, do not go into like your bank website, because it's probably, and especially if you have a Wi-Fi that it doesn't require your password, it's not encrypted. So anybody with the right tools can actually gain access to your financial information if you access that website from the public Wi-Fi. So talking about analyzing threats to your data come from accidents and then malicious people. For example, users getting access to folders they should not see, viruses striking and deleting folders, other things like dead hard drives, scratch optical disks, hackers, and social media as well. Unauthorized access can arise from many sources: curiosity and poor user account management. Something called dumpster diving, which is basically people go into your dumpster and search for, search for papers or some documents to get information out of it, right? And then shoulder surfing, observing someone's screen or keyboard to get information. And the term social engineering is a process of using or manipulating people inside the organization to gain access. So tricking people to give you information. So you could be pretending to be someone who is from the organization, like the CEO of the company or someone who works for that organization. And you could call the help desk or call the front desk and have them give you certain information. And that's called social engineering. And there are different types, like infiltration, which basically going into the building and pretending to be a staff member. You can do it through phone calls, call the company and get information, and then through phishing, like an email or something like that. So again, infiltration, which is hackers enter a building, in the guise of legitimacy. After gaining entry into that building, what the hacker would do is they snoop around desks, they talk to people, and gather pieces of information, right? I remember reading a story from one of the security a professional when I was reading some of the articles, or I think the book, and then they were talking about how they actually that person was challenged to hack into his friend's server. So his friend actually challenged him to hack into his server, right? Say, I have the most secure server. So what he did, he tried and he couldn't get to the server remotely. So what he did, he just walked into the building and pretended to be a staff member and made a fake ID, and then he just walked in and they allowed him into the building, and then he was able to actually go into the front desk and tell the staff, the person that was at the front desk knew him, so they let him wait into the office, and he was able to just go in and get the server, right, and just walk away with it. So that's one example. Following someone through a door is called tailgating. So you have a standing outside, you're trying to get into the building, and someone could just stand behind you or try to get in behind you, and they don't have like a an ID or something like that to get in, or a card to allow them to get into the building. So a man trap is something that is designed to combat tailgating. So what does that mean? Is the outer door of the building must be closed before the inner door is opened. That would prevent two people going in at the same time. So each person will be going in separately. And then entry control roster is managed by the guard. You can also look at names. The guard at the building can actually look at the names, who is authorized. And if you're not on the list, you're not allowed to get in. Telephone scams is it's the most common type of social engineering attack. And what basically happens is you ask for information. That's what you do in telephone scams. They call you and then calling help desk, for example, and impersonating someone and getting their password reset. So you can call the help desk and say, I work for the company, and my name is so and so. You give them a different name, and if you are able to convince the help desk to reset the password of somebody else and give you that new password, then you are able to get into the system. So you have to be careful with that. That's why, like in a lot of companies in IT, they train their help desk staff, and sometimes they have certain criteria. Like, for example, if you call the help desk, you might have to give them certain information that only the user would know. So things like that, right? And we'll talk about phishing, for example, is the attempts to obtain username and password from someone. You could do that. Most likely is done by email, and typically performed through email. And then what the attacker would do is they pose as a legitimate company and ask for your login credentials. So, and this sometimes, like if you were, we do this in IT, we sometimes actually try to test the users, and we do actually call or send them an email and send them a fake link and see who clicks on it, just to kind of get an idea of who is trained. And if someone clicks on the link, there's no harm done. It's just that we have to train them not to do that again. So, and then explain to them the ways, how that happens. And then when you talk about the word spear phishing, it's the same as phishing, but except you're not targeting any random person at the company, but you're targeting someone who's a big shot, like the CEO of the company or CFO. That's called spear phishing, specific person, right? Or any employee, specific person. Now, talk about data destruction is more than just intentional or unintentional erasing or corrupting data. The data destruction can originate from authorized or unauthorized users. So someone is authorized to delete files, that could happen, or someone who's not authorized, and they could just do something accidentally to bring a malware, for example, to the system. So users might be uninformed about the extent to which they are authorized to make changes. So sometimes you give someone high level access to a system or data, and they're not aware of what the harm they could do with that access. And sometimes people will ask, oh, can you give me higher level access? I just don't need to get authorization every time I need to access a file. But then if they're not aware of what the harm that could be done by just, getting tricked or clicking on the wrong link, what could happen? So not everybody is aware of that. Now talking about administrator, so administrative access is basically when you talk about administrator, supervisor, or sometimes they call it root user accounts. These accounts have full control over the system, not just the computer. We're talking about the system in general or the data. So if you have a full control over a file or a folder, then you can delete the files. You can do all kind of everything you need to do, right? So user requiring administrative access. Sometimes some applications do not run unless you have admin access. So if you're an administrator, if you have admin access, higher level access to your data, to the data, try to use strong passwords to protect it. If you have, and then practice good physical security as well. We talked about physical security, and we talked about how to protect the physical devices and so on. So now talking about the classification of information. So data can be classified as public data, public use. I'm sorry, the three primary categories of information: they are for public use, right? For internal use in the organization, or for restricted use, only specific users, right? So so when we talk about the public here, information classifications, you have public, internal, confidential, regulatory handling, and so on, right? So if you have internal network transmission, if it's wired or wireless, if it's a public data, there is no special requirements for that. If it's internal use, allow remote access only with VPN and two-factor authentication. So if that data is on a company network and is intended for internal use only, but you are not internally inside the company, you are, let's say, traveling or you're at home, then how are you going to access that data if it's only intended for internal use? So like I said, you can do things like VPN, which basically from your home, you launch the VPN application. And once you do that, you have more security, the data is being protected. And if it's confidential, you can also encrypt the data, which basically means you implement a technical program which allows you to, if the data gets stolen or lost, at least whoever stole the data, they cannot see that, they can access the data, but they cannot read it. They cannot really see what the data is about. So that's what encryption comes in. So you can do VPN, two-factor authentication. When I say two-factor, I'm talking about, if you used to be, or a long time ago, only you log in with your password, that's it. But if you allow two-factor authentication, you log into your system or your, then it's going to ask for your password. You enter the password. Once you do that, then you have to enter another factor. It could be something like your phone number as a second factor. So if you have your setup to get a message, text message, then a code will be sent out to your text message, and you have to enter that as a second factor authentication. So you log in, it's like logging in twice, basically. And that, so even if someone has your password, in this case, they still need to have access to your phone or your email to be able to get into the file or data. Okay. All right. I'll pause here for a second. If you have any question, if not, I'm going to continue. All right. And then we'll talk about regulatory handling, encryption where technically feasible, allow remote access only when critical need, and only with the VPN and two-factor authentication. And we'll talk about things like portable devices, do not use exception approved infrastructure. So websites here, you talk about if it's internal use, can only be posted on, it's called intranet site. It's not internet, but intranet, which is like a site that is only accessible on a network. So only if you are able, if you have to be on either VPN or you have to be on a company network, you have to be in the office to be able to see that site. That's what intranet is all about. Okay. And I'll talk about for regulatory handling, do not post on any intranet or internet sites, things that that you don't want people to see. Now, talked about security administration, you have information classified as top secret, secret, confidential, restricted, official, and classified. So top secret is the highest level of classification for information on a national level. So it's usually done with the government organizations. If it's a top secret, no one else is allowed to see it. And if it's a secret, such materials would cause a serious damage to national security if it were publicly available. And confidential data is such material would cause damage or be prejudicial to national security if publicly available. And if it's restricted, such material would cause undesirable effects if publicly available. And if it's official data, it's such materials forms the generality of government business, public service delivery, and commercial activity. And if the data is being unclassified, is technically not a classification level, but this is the feature of some classification schemes, and it's used for the government documents that do not merit a particular classification. Okay. Talk about some of the regulations, and we're going to have a specific lecture about regulations, but just to briefly talk about some of the regulations. You have some, when we talk about regulations here, we're talking about the federal level in the United States. We're not talking about European Union or China or any other country. We're talking about in the federal United States. So talking about healthcare, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA, and it's a regulation that mandates national standards and procedures for the storage, use, and transmission of personal medical information. So this is related to healthcare, and it's federal law in the United States. It's not a state law, and it talks about procedures for storage, how to store the data, how to transmit the data of the personal medical information. So if you have a patient information, how you store it, how you're allowed to store it, things like that. Are you allowed to send it through email, and so on and so forth? So the other regulation is called Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, or GLBA. It's also known as the Financial Modernization Act of 1999. And that regulation basically requires financial institutions to develop privacy notices and to notify customers that they are entitled to privacy. This is only regarding the financial institutions, right? It has to do with like banks and things like that. So the another one is called Sarbanes-Oxley Act, or SOX, is also known as the Public Company Accounting. So this has to do with accounting Reform and Investor Protection Act, and it was implemented in 2002. And this regulation covers the responsibilities of public corporation, adding criminal penalties to certain misconducts. Another one is called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And this act gives federal authorities, primarily the FBI, the ability to prosecute hackers, spammers, and other terrorists. And there's another regulation called the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA. And as a student, you should know what this is about. If you and this dictates that educational institutions may not release information to unauthorized parties without the express permission of the student, or in the case of a minor, the parents of the student. Okay. And you have something called the Computer Security Act, and this was I'm sure it's outdated now. It's 1987, because a lot of technology has been developing since 1987. So it requires federal agencies to identify and protect computer systems that contain sensitive information. And then you have Cyberspace Electronic Security Act, and it gives law enforcement or the right to gain access to encryption keys and cryptography methods. And then Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2002 allows federal agencies relatively easy access to internet service providers. That's what ISP stands for, and then other data transmission facilities to monitor communication of individuals who are suspected of committing computer crimes using the internet. And of course, you have a lot of you heard about the Patriot Act, or this law gives the US government extreme latitude in pursuing criminals who commit terrorist acts. Now, move on from regulations to data managers. There are two terms here that are very important. There's a term related to data. It's called data custodians. And data custodian is someone who's responsible for the day-to-day caretaking of the data. So they don't own the data, they just take care of it, right? And then data owner is the accountable for who has access to information assets within their functional areas, like in your department, for example, HR and so on. Now, talking about data sharing and retention, private data cannot be shared with third parties. And data owner is the, again, we talked about that. And the objective of data retention policy is to keep important information for future use or reference. That's what data retention is. So, you have to, certain laws require certain data limits. For example, if you have a work in healthcare, or you might have to keep the data of the patient for, let's say, 3 years or 4 years, whatever the limit is. And that's what we talk about, retaining the data for future use or for reference. So if you've been requested by a court to show that data, then you can show it. Talk about system crash and hardware failure. These related to so computers or systems will fail, and they happen at opportune times. So what you should do is create redundancy in areas prone to failures. For example, I talked about backup. So if your hard drive is going to fail one day, then at least you have 2 copies of your data, 1 copy somewhere else. Then at least you have a redundancy, which allows you to restore your data if you lose the data on a first device, for example. And again, talk about how protecting the data from physical theft. So protect your systems physically. The best network software security measures are useless if the systems are not physically protected, because you could have a strong password, and then but someone steals your hard drive or steals your laptop, then they can take it and they can open it and they can take the hard drive out and then find ways to kind of try to crack it or get into the password. So networks are efficient vehicles for transmitting viruses. So in addition to internet attacks, you have things like the USB drives, the optical disks, and so on. They could also transfer viruses to other systems as well. So talking about security concepts and technologies, strategic and tactical goals, which basically means understanding the big picture and available technologies for security. So, what are some of the available technologies, right? So you could have built-in encryption into your system, for example. That's one tool that you can use, right? Things like, for example, Microsoft has their Windows devices. They now come in with built-in antivirus programs that you can run. You don't have to buy one, and things like that. You can also use tools like LastPass or KeePass, those password managers that allows you to have strong passwords for different systems or different websites or different logins, but not having the same password, and you can actually save all those passwords in a password manager. You can also, have tools like backup. You can back up the tool using like the free tools like Google. You can back up your data on Google Drive and so on and so forth, right? And then concepts and technology areas, you have access control. Access control basically means you control access to data. So how you do that? You do it through like strong passwords, permissions, and so on and so forth. You have data classification and compliance. We talked about that, and you have reporting as well. You can report, get audits and logs and things like that. So access control is the process of controlling access to data, programs, and other computing resources. And it's composed of 4 interlinked areas. You have the physical security. We talked about that. Authentication. So what is authentication? You authenticate a user, and basically means, once they have a password, in order to know they have access, you have to authenticate them, which means they have to enter the correct password. And then you have users and groups. Like, for example, you have the files or folders. You can set up permissions by users or by different groups. You can also have security policies in place as well. Secure physical area and lockdown systems. So lock the door to your workspace Do not leave computer while logged in. So for example, people sometimes they leave the computer running and the screen is on and they walk away and they don't lock their computer, and then someone can just come in and copy data. So also other thing is like ID badges can be used to control building access and store authentication tools, like something called RFID or radio frequency identification, or smart cards. And you can also identify poor security practices. So what are some of the poor security practices people do? People write their passwords down on a piece of paper, and sometimes they even put the password under the keyboard, for example, right? Or leaving sensitive documents in sight. Use privacy filters, which is basically you put that on the screen, and if somebody's standing behind you and then you have that privacy filter, they have to be straight behind you to be able to see what's on the screen. But if they're not straight behind you, they are at the side of you on each side, then they still cannot get access to the data because they cannot see it because the filter is there. And so again, we talked about confidentiality, which is protecting the information from being exposed to an unauthorized party. And then integrity is protecting data from being modified. So remember this, confidentiality is protecting data from being exposed. Integrity, protecting data from being modified, which basically means you change data. And then availability is making sure that information is accessible to only authorized people, authorized users, right? A backup is one example. Let's say, you have multiple servers and so on. Now, talking about providing education and training, organizations training and educational programs, they need to be tailored to at least 3 different audiences, right? You have the organization as a whole, which is so-called rank and file employees. And then you have also training should be tailored to management, staff management, and then technical staff as well. The technical staff training might be a little bit different than the rest of them. So some of the things that you can protect your data online is basically deleting cookies, and cookies is basically like a file that's being saved on your browser or on your computer that has access, that has some of the data or some of the, it tells you what site you access and so on. So log out of social media sites while you browse the web. So change your smartphone's privacy settings, for example, the screen lock, the limit ad tracking, and so on. And then you can also, one of the other things you can do is to skip store loyalty cards, because when you have those store loyalty cards, you use them, you're telling the store that what you are purchasing and so on. So they kind of have a track of the things that you buy from them. And then employee advanced online tools, advanced online tools, and then you opt out of data broker collection whenever possible. And then you can also do a digital checkup. Google, for example, they allow you to, they have a really good option there on the browser where you can do a checkup to see, where you logged in on your Google account, how many devices, things like that. So you can do a digital checkup on your machine or on your account. And another thing is to do not reveal personal. This is according to Electronic Frontier Foundation. They have 12 ways to protect your online privacy. This is their recommendation. And they say here, do not reveal personal information inadvertently, and then turn on cookie notices in your browser. And then they ask you to use cookie management software or intermediaries. And keep clean email addresses basically means that, and I do this also, is basically having not just one email address that we use for everything. You can have one email address used for your professional use. Another one you can use, like if you want to sign up for like advertisements, or you want to sign up for petitions and so on. So I would also agree with this, that you should be using 2 different email addresses. Don't reveal personal details to strangers or just met friends. Also, I see this a lot on social media where people, like on their LinkedIn profile, they have their phone number and so on, their address, their home address, things like that. So you have to kind of pay attention to that. And then also realize you may be monitored at work. So avoid sending highly personal email to mailing lists and keeping sensitive files on your home computer. Also be aware of sites that offer some sort of reward or prize in exchange for your data. And be conscious of web security, and also be conscious of home computer security as well. And another number 9 is examine privacy policies and seals. So a lot of us, when we do actually have to download a program or some things like that, we have to accept the agreement. And a lot of times we do not read the policy, right? So remember that you decide what information about yourself to reveal, when, why, and to whom. I kind of tend to not agree with this sentence 100%, because it says, remember that you decide what information about yourself to reveal. But sometimes information about yourself that, for example, like you have a Equifax that did a breach, they have information about you, like your social security number, your phone number. You had no choice. That data was breached by them, not by you. The hackers were able to breach their servers, so they were able to get information about you, but not from you, but from the other third party that you use. So it doesn't always work like that. So another recommendation is to use encryption to encrypt your data, and do not reply to spammers. Just delete the emails or report them as spam. Never submit a credit card number or other highly sensitive personal information without first making sure that your connection is secure or encrypted. Things like that. And other ways to stay protected is to use VPN when possible, and encrypt your data online. Use strong passwords, and then also be aware of, we talked about social engineering, and regular updates, like update your systems, your devices, and so on and so forth. And also understand how phishing work, or that's also very important to stay protected. All right, so that's the end of the